So let's get started here. We're going to be doing some brand new stuff for you today. Today we're going to be reading. This is a brand new channel. Go ahead and check out Card Reviews and Magic Theory with me, your host, Jesse. But today we're going to be doing some coin magic over here to get us started. And the reason why we're doing that is because things are not always what they seem, right? The coins will jump around the board. Just as our characters in our play here will be moving around their different pieces in their different lives. So there we have a nice little coin matrix for you to start us off here. Now let's get started with what we're doing. Yeah, what are we doing? Well, the answer to that is fairly simple. Deactivate. Activate. Wonder powers. He's there somewhere, don't worry, people. He is there somewhere. There he is. Okay, so what are we looking at today? Today we're looking at a story that I wrote many moons ago called Land of Forever. Obviously, it's not a complete novel, but this is the idea that we're going to be going with. And we're going to go ahead and read to you what, not all this, but just like the opening. This is kind of what you might have on the back of the book. But again, I haven't looked at this project in years. So let's go ahead and read through it and see if there's anything of worth here, because we might start up our writing. So let's go ahead. In the dark days of the early 16th century, many feared the rule of the Juggernauts. They were giants that could crush a man with their bare hands. They were feared across the land of forever. They forced the humans into slavery for many centuries. All had lost hope of ever finding peace when the servant of Vouday appeared from the far corner of forever. His name was Raquel, and he was a true warrior like the stories. He fought for the people when nobody else even knew how to fight. The humans turned on their old masters and gained their freedom. All was well until Raquel was captured and killed by the Juggernauts. Now the humans have to fight for themselves to maintain their hold on their newly gained freedom. Can they survive? Or was the servant of Vouday's death in vain? That's powerful right there, just to start us off. There's a couple of things to talk about there. This is, like I said, this is the synopsis. So we're telling you what's happening, right? Now, 16th century, what does that mean? If this is a different world, then there's no way for us to know, unless it's the same, across the board. But you'll find out later that it's not, right in the next passage, as far as what the conversion of time would be. So they were giants, juggernauts, obviously, giants. Okay, but we'll get more into that later. I'll give you some backstory on that. Let's see, the Land of Forever. So we're getting the idea that the Land of Forever is not the world that we are from. They forced the humans into slavery for many centuries. Many centuries. Well, what does that mean? Especially if this is from the point of humans who don't have a written history. So how much is really being shared with them in slavery? So it could be a lot longer than that. It could be a lot shorter than that. It's just a matter of not knowing how many centuries is centuries. So, without having a proper history. Obviously, we learn here that Raquel, as we learn here, the servant of Vouday, isn't a main character. Or maybe he is a main character, but he clearly dies down here. He's captured. His name is Raquel. He's a true warrior like the stories. Obviously, that's written from the perspective of somebody who's been in slavery for many centuries. They don't know. They haven't had like a true, they have old stories, but let's see. He fought for the people when nobody else knew how to fight. The humans turned. Okay, gotcha. Raquel was captured and killed. Ooh, hits the heartstrings, right? We're losing our main character here, or so to speak. Now the humans have to, not only did they just learn how to fight, they just kind of gained their freedom, but that would also the idea of, in what step of the process would that be? Because obviously if the war is still happening, well, is their freedom really won, or are they still constantly in that struggle? Is it a rebellion? So we're going to figure all that stuff out as we go. And then here, can they survive? Or was his death in vain? So is everything just going to go back to the way that it was? Now, obviously, I could fix this because the prologue thing, back when I was writing, I tried to shape it like a book, and that doesn't really work out very well. So now we're getting into something really important here, which is the way that I want to structure this story. The chapters are going to be like books of the Bible, right? Because for these people, the story is their salvation. This is their Bible of sorts, is what they're writing in their world. And there's going to be parallels between our world and their world. So to beg for salvation, right? Because here you have people who were not happy, so to speak, but they didn't know any other way of life. So now they're getting a taste for what it's like to truly have autonomy over the things that they do, and now they feel like they want to hold on to that, right? So here, but that's not quite what this is about, to beg for salvation. We're going to learn what that's about. You can see my writing style at that point was not very good. This is something that I would correct if I were to come back to start this project up. So let's go ahead and take a look. Very dialogue heavy with very little in between. This could be very easily tweaked to incorporate the setting into the story. But let's go ahead and dive into this real quick to see how long this is. Yeah, it gets pretty heavy down at the bottom. So I was really into like dialogue writing, I guess, at that time. So here we go. Let's go. So it has come to this, said Marsh breathlessly. Yes, replied the quieter quietly. That seems a little strange there. But why? I've done nothing, she spat angrily. It is not my place to judge. I am merely the quieter, he responded again quietly. Please give me more time. I cannot. Please, Raquel, save me. Marsh whispered frantically. The quieter slowly pushed his long thumbnail into the jugular of his other half. Wait a minute. His other half? The quieter slowly... I already read that part. At that point, the quieter felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Tears slid down his cheek, and a groan escaped his lips. Why? He wondered how anything in this world could make him take the life of his beloved. He had been a quieter for almost 6 years, and there hadn't been any slip-ups. Now he stood looking down at his dead wife. Chills. And all he could think about was the time they had spent together, all the places they had traveled to, and all the things they had been through. The children that had been raised, and all the good they had done for their friends. It was all gone. Raquel turned from the darkening room and fled. He was afraid of what he had become. He ran from that deathly place. He ran from his life, everything that was left of it anyway. He made his way out into the street. A slow drizzle started to dampen the landscape. Raquel stumbled from stairway to stairway across the empty side street. The sounds of the night were already setting in. Lights were shining from downtown, but this didn't interest Raquel. Some late-night walker had seen him and moved on quickly, thinking he was just another drunk that inhabited their diminishing city. Raquel ignored all of this and fled into the road. As he looked up into the sky from his horizontal position, he thought of the reason he had joined the Order. It had been so simple, but now it seemed pointless. Why do you always demand so much? He screamed at the clouds-covered sky. His tears of sadness mixed with the tears of heaven, and he drifted into a foggy dream. And there he was. My child. Why do you ask this? The voice was deafening and soothing at the same time. I have followed you blindly, and now I have lost everything. I do not want to be your slave any longer. Please release me, Father, so that I can go to my eternal damnation. My son, you haven't been a devoted follower. My son, you have been a devoted follower, and now when things are becoming difficult, you are losing your way. It is only natural. The fog swirled around the aged man. Raquel could see clearer, and before him stood a gray-bearded man. The fog formed to his face to appear as a majestic mane. His breath was taken away, and he felt as if his eyes could be seared from his skull. Please, Father, save me. The mist started to evaporate, and with it, the old man. Pause here for a second before we move on to the next page, because I want to draw attention, maybe in the dialogue here, that he almost says the same words that his wife had just said moments ago. So it's a beautiful thought here, and we can deep dive into what's going on with these characters in a second. Okay, that is what I'm doing, my son. What do you think I'm doing? Raquel felt a surge of pain, and then blackness consumed him. When he awoke, he found himself in a grassy field. It didn't look like hell or buffalo. Well, it's a buffalo. Not that they were much different these days. Oof, that's rough. But he wasn't sure where he was either way. He struggled to his feet and tried to get a bearing on his surroundings. He realized then that his last words were the same as those of his precious Mashera. He cried again for his lost loved one. I basically led into the same idea. The fact that he had taken her life made it all the worse. Taking a look around, he seen trees and mountains. The grasslands continued for quite a long distance. Raquel had always been pretty smart, and his quick wits quickly formulated a few possibilities as to his whereabouts. I feel like this is placating the writing to the fact that Raquel is, I'm pretty smart. So that might not necessarily be worded well for who I am now versus then. Drawing attention to the fact that, I'm smart, but not showing it through the next couple of paragraphs. So I feel like that's unnecessary. You can come to your own conclusion. Based on the fresh smell and clear sky, he would have to say he was either brought to a different universe or he was in a different time period. He decided to stay under the radar until he knew the exact parameters of his exile to this foreign place. Let's how much more do we got here? There's a lot more here than what I was anticipating. I can keep going. But I want to talk a little bit about what is happening so far in the story. He's saying different universe or a different time period, which would insinuate that he has a working knowledge of the world as it is. He said that he's traveled a lot with his wife, and he's a part of a mysterious order that would have something suggestively that it has something to do with God. And even in the beginning, it says he's the servant of Uday, whatever that means. So all of these things coming together, he has deduced right off the bat they've moved from Buffalo, from our world, to a different world. Now, you could say, okay, he's wrong, but in the context of what we're talking about here, he clearly was shifted someplace else, especially with what happened with the fog. Now, to fill in a couple of blanks, and you learn this a little bit later, Mashira is actually an archaeologist, and Raquel is a priest. Initially starting out, he was a priest, and then eventually he moved to a point, obviously in this world, not necessarily like our world as far as I understand it, he moved to a specific order whose job it was to, he's a quieter, his job was to make stories disappear, so to speak. So for the church. So if things started to arise or get out of hand, his specific group would be assigned the task of getting rid of the story. And that could be good or bad. Well, it's probably always bad if you're trying to hide information, but meaning that it could be for the public's sake and for the church's sake. However, if this order is being controlled by people, then they could have their own agenda. So the fact that he saw God, we don't know this yet. We don't know whether or not him seeing God is normal, if God is the one in charge of his order, or if he's part of a religious sect that is doing their own thing. We're not really sure, but he clearly believes in God and has devoted his life to God, and so it can be assumed that, for him at least, in his own experiences, this would be normal. But in the context of the story, it is not. So you have to infer the fact that he had just killed his wife because he was ordered to, and then God appeared to him and said that he was saving him. So did God order the hit, or was it ordered by his order, his sect, as a quieter, and then now God is coming to him saying, hey, you kind of got led astray there. Let me help you out. because you've lost everything. But it could also be a part of his grand plan. So it's so many nuanced things happening there that it's a fascinating twist, at least in my own perception. So let's continue. Again, like I said, I'm just looking at the idea that we're right here on page 4, and I've got 25 total pages. There's chapter 4. Let's see if we can try to get to, this is just the prequel. We're trying to get past the prequel. There's chapter 3, chapter 2. You're getting a glimpse of it. So we're on The Land of Forever is where the book actually starts. So let's try to make it to page 10, shall we? And then we'll do a little bit more chatting about that. Okay, so movement caught his eye, and he instinctually dropped low. He's trained. From his vantage point, he could see massive forms marching along the lower valley. His eyesight had been failing him for some time now, but he could see they weren't human. He could also see that they had small creatures tending to them. That can infer that the sun had been declining, and so he had poor visibility. Or it could, we discussed the fact that he's had many years with his wife. He's old. I mean, we're talking retirement. So this is a big important thing here to know, that the servant of Raquel is an elderly individual, because he wasn't recruited into as a quieter until later in life. So that's something to keep in mind here. He's old, for in terms of being elderly status. Just for context. Obviously, we learned at the beginning that we have juggernauts, which are the bigger creatures, and then the smaller creatures from the distance that he can see are the humans. Taking a deep breath, he formulated a strategy for his future action. So he's really trying to calculate, and that could be taken two different ways. One is in this particular situation, but two, if you come to a new world, if you start challenging the working order of that world, how is that going to play a factor here? What is his purpose here? Is he here to help the juggernauts? Is he here to help the humans? He's led a very ambiguous, towing the line type. He just killed his wife, so he's done things that are questionable in his line of work. So we really have to deep dive into that. Wherever he was, the human population was enslaved by these behemoths, which meant finding allies would prove difficult. Most likely, he would have to find his purpose on his own. There wasn't any doubt as to why his lord had brought him to such a place. So he's immediately made the assumption that his job is to save the humans that are here. Interesting. I wonder if I ever explain why he comes to that conclusion. After the party moved away, Raquel started to follow. He didn't have a clue as to the ability these creatures may have. As he shadowed them, he kept out of range and hearing as best he could. Unfortunately, he forgot one thing. The rear scouts came forward a little before nightfall to give their report and stumbled right into Raquel. The quieter recovered quickly and drew his silenced Colt from the inner pocket in his coat. Just a point to note here, I don't know anything about guns. So even at the time, I knew less at that time. So he drew a silenced Colt, whatever that means. He fired 2 shots into the first creature and was surprised when his bullets ricocheted off from the creature's armored body. The percussion forced the behemoth backwards, and blood flew from the tiny wounds. Raquel was afraid he was about to be ripped apart when the wounded creature fell over with blood running from his ears. The other turned to flee, fearing some type of sorcery by the look on his face, that's an inference that Raquel makes, I'm assuming, in this context of the creature is now afraid, even though from Raquel's perspective, from Raquel's perspective, he's about to get ripped apart because his bullets were ineffective. But from Raquel's perception of the other creature, wait a minute, this guy, he's afraid of what just happened. So Raquel is Raquel raised his hand and fired 2 more times. The creature made it another dozen steps before falling to the ground. He had worked hard to earn his title. So Raquel, even in that state where he's unsure and outmatched for all intents and purposes, he still manages to deliver the fatal blows, because part of being the quieter is that you stop the spread of the story. However, there's something very important here, and that he kind of mentions but doesn't elaborate on, which is the rear scouts. There's a rule for rear scouts. They're reporting something. If they don't check in, red flag, right? So all of that happening there, and the bullets, basically, he's shooting them in the head, and the bullets themselves can't pierce the skin, but the damage, the momentum and the velocity of the bullets are still scrambling their brain. So they're still dying, but obviously if that's just their head, they're not even wearing a helmet. So imagine if they were wearing a helmet. In this case, it would become more difficult for his firearms to play a role here. But that's just something to say there. Now he goes into his monologue. I am no longer a quieter of God, but what am I? Am I a servant still? But in which way? He whispered as he examined the bodies. He could see detailed work of hands that could belong to none other than the human slaves. Perhaps I am meant to help these people, so I need a new name. Finding nothing of use on the dead, the servant moved on. He knew he couldn't follow his present course because somebody would be missing the 2 scouts. See, again, I'm out thinking ahead here, talking about these things, because these things seemed so obvious to me when I was doing the writing that I'm mentioning them now, but I also included them here. The inference for the reader. At least he could see their efficiency by how fast they respond to missing scouts. So basically that's important for him because even in the folly of him forgetting the rear scouts and then killing them, he wants to move out of the area so that he can see how long the response time is, and that would give him an idea of how well oiled their society and culture, military-wise, how well they respond to this. Given that for all intents and purposes, he's only seen the fact that there are juggernauts and they're human slaves. So given that, he has no other idea or knowledge about this world. So he really has to start building a bigger picture as soon as possible if he wants to survive. To answer his question, he's seen about 20 massive forms moving toward him through the gloom. Luckily, he was moving out of their range, but it would still be close. So his answer is this. They didn't show up on time. The juggernauts immediately sent out a search party. Immediately. But there's other things to keep in mind there. And I don't know if I will mention this later on. So let me wait until I get past this. He had wanted to remain unknown, but it wasn't fated. Stories would spread and soon he would be hunted. He smiled. He had never been good at being prey. That is why he had become a quieter. That seems strange now to me, calling them a quieter. I didn't want to call him a silencer because that seemed too much on the nose, right? But the idea that I wanted to go into is he doesn't know what the sight or the hearing of these juggernauts are. They could have heard the silenced pistols for all he knew. So in the context of the story, again, speaking about the abilities of the juggernauts, it's still a mystery to him. Whether or not their response time was based on the fact that they work so well that if the rear scouts don't report right on time, they send people out, or if they had just heard the commotion. There's no way of truly knowing at this point. But that's the kind of stuff that as a reader, that's the kind of thing I want you to be thinking about. Let's see here. So, but today is a Vu day. Oh, there's the words. Vu day. What does this mean? His humor turned to sadness and his jaw tightened. That was how Mashira had always said new day. Kind of like a little bit of an accent. Vu day. But explains why. It was supposed to be a good omen from some ancient civilization. Mashira had known all that kind of stuff. She was an archaeologist. She studied history. Which then leads into the big question before we move ahead here is you have a Mashira, who is an archaeologist who is all about history, all about discovering all these things. She didn't set out to, she was religious in some capacity, but she didn't set out to disprove God. But her husband is a priest who then became a member of an order that is now silencing stories. So now you start to really get this idea that she was a master of her craft as well. And so the idea that I want you to be thinking about, obviously later in the story, it may circle back, but I never really got into this, which is, why was he ordered to kill her? As an archaeologist, she could have discovered something good or bad that the order did not want discovered. So, I'll leave that with you. Okay. Raquel blinked through the blood. See, here's something I might want to change, because I don't want to continue using the name Raquel, because he had already stated he wants to do away with all of that. He is now the servant of Uday. So I may, obviously coming back to the project, I would change all of that out past this point. He may return once he makes friends and starts to find himself again, may go back to being Raquel, or may have just a new name or just the servant. Because when the readers will know him as Raquel, but the new people in the story will never know what his name was until he tells them. So that's kind of where I want to be with that. I don't want to change that out. Raquel blinked through the blood and sweat that had accumulated on his face. Why was there blood? Oh, okay. So there should be a little bit of an ellipsis here to let you know that this is, I believe, later on in time. So let's reassess that. He just had the confrontation with the Juggernauts. He moved on. He called himself, now he's the servant of Uday at this point, his internal monologue. Then we fast forward. Raquel blinked through the blood and sweat that had accumulated on his face. One of his eyes was swollen shut and his nose was broken in a few different places. The stockade he was in had the bloodstains from the previous humans have been been its occupants. As all the recent events ran through Raquel's mind, he sighed and smiled. See, he's still referring to himself as Raquel. He felt calm because he knew that his true punishment would begin. His Lord had finally given him his wish, his long-awaited suffering for the most satanic deed, murdering of his precious Mashira with his own hands. Tears fell yet again, and his impatience exploded in a rage known only to the berserkers. "Finish it, my lord. Give me my peace, God, Father of justice," he raged at the sky, ending with a sarcastic twist. So now there's like a bitterness here, because he's talking about killing Mashira with his bare hands, which we had said earlier that Juggernauts killed humans with bare hands. So there's a parallel. And so now he believes in this segment here that God, as the Father, he's now twisted in his belief, because he may believe that God is the one who ordered him to do it. So there's an idea there, but that's only in his mind. We don't get the idea that God has done that. Yet again, the pain and loss of blood caused Raquel to fall unconscious. Now we may keep Raquel because it's seeming to fit here at this point, because time has passed and we haven't really, I didn't give anything to like, obviously a fast forward to his capture, but how long had passed? Nobody knows. I don't know, at least by the inference of the writing. So he's unconscious. He drifted in a place he assumed was the void between life and death. There wasn't anything to do. He wasn't light, and it wasn't light, and it wasn't dark. Raquel merely floated in a haze that clouded his mind. He blinked, and before him stood the man he called Father, an old man with a beard of fog and a bright radiance. Raquel saw this glow as arrogance. This man believed he was above the world of men. He believed he could do no wrong. So what has happened? I want to really take a break there, because there's like a powerful emotion here from Raquel that's saying, like, something has happened between the despair that he had just felt. God sent him here for murdering his wife, or at least that's his penance that he's enacted, but God sent him here for something. But what has happened so far that has made him twisted? Something has happened that made him twist away from God so much that he is now angry with him, even though he still wants to be punished for what he did. He almost feels like God should be punished as well. I don't know, something's happening here. So, Heavenly Father, what, pray tell, have I done to deserve your audience once more? The sarcasm here is dripping. His words carried neither respect nor awe as it once would have. My child, never call me that. I once believed you to be worthy, but now I know the truth. Spittle foamed at the edges of a rabid mouth. Now he's delirium maybe, but he's in spirit form, so the shackles of, this is really his soul speaking to God. I am saddened by your words. You are one of my favorites, but I can see you have been consumed by your hatred, a trait that stems from my most arrogant son, which is strange, seeming his hatred is for you. The misty beard shakes as the man tisks his head back and forth. Perhaps you are the arrogant one, and Lucy Lucifer, are you now a fool to even think of speaking that name? See, I'm not liking it because there's been a lot of material that has come out since then. I referred to Lucifer like shortened form of Lucy, even before the show, and they started using it. So now I feel not that I'm claiming anything from that, but I want to detract from that idea and move away from this type of dialogue because it just seems so familiar, and I don't want to do that. But he's talking about the hatred that he now has. And the whole idea that, it's from Lucifer. But, I mean, this is just a generic story. That's the story of, the idea. He shook with rage, but quickly brought himself under control, then continued. So clearly he has a problem with Lucifer in the context. He doesn't even want Lucifer to be brought up. Because maybe it's because he feels that he failed in that situation. For that purpose. Or he's still angry at Lucifer for what he did. I don't know. No inference here for that. My son, it saddens me to do this, but I fear you have left me no choice. I hereby judge you for your sins, both past and present, and punish you justly. Don't make me laugh. You don't have the right to judge me. You don't have any authority over me, not anymore. As I decree, you are banished to the end of forever. You will watch from just beyond, and you will watch the events unfold in this land. Goodbye, my child. So what does that mean? So he's obviously Raquel doesn't recognize the authority of God any longer, but God ignores that and he decrees that he's banished to the end of forever, which he's in the land of forever. So clearly, does that mean that he's going to be like watching over the land of forever, but not ever be able to do anything in it? Fascinating there. His punishment is now to watch what he has started. Because he started something. He even said this. He said he would be hunted by this world. And there's been a time lapse between when he started running to being captured. But we learned at the beginning that he started a revolution and he gained the freedom of these humans, and now they're fighting to hold on to it. He did some really powerful stuff that I explained all the way at the beginning that we just kind of jumped right over here. He did like a whole rebellion, a whole revolution in between starting that first incident with the rear scouts until getting caught. Raquel blinked again, and he was alone in the void once more. He floated for a long time before he felt a cold shiver deep in his spine. All of his pain rushed back to him as his spirit re-entered his body. The shock almost killed him, and it made him wish he wasn't such a strong man. Okay. He realized then that his captors had beaten him again. He could barely open his right eye, and he could feel blood trickling into his lungs. Something told him he shouldn't have angered God so much. Now he would suffer until the very end. And if the old man was to be believed, he would suffer for as long as forever. Look, he is awake again, the Juggernaut spoke in a low, rough voice that was full of malice. That necessarily wasn't a low, rough voice. Look, he is awake again. Wow. I like when they refuse to die. That way we can torture them even more, said another Juggernaut. The two Juggernauts started laughing and walked up to their prisoner. The square was packed full of humans and Juggernauts. Most of the humans were slaves, but a few were free. This was a rally to show the slaves that even their greatest hope meant nothing to the mighty Juggernauts. Prophet and Caretaker were ex-slaves that had been the first to gain their freedom, with the assistance of Svad, servant of Voudet. Now, as their savior and mentor struggled with this tortured existence, they could only watch. They desperately hoped that they could survive their own troubles that were yet to come. Prophet was a small man just out of boyhood. He was still shy and withdrawn, and for a speaker, that was a contradiction. But what does speaker mean? He's a speaker, obviously, an orator. Svad had been helping him with his confidence, but now Prophet was worse than ever, since he had to watch his hero falter. Caretaker was an old man who had been well taken care of by his Juggernaut masters. He had been trained in the healing arts and had attended many wounds on and off the battlefield. He had an inner strength that had worried even his previous masters. Recently, he had discovered that his abilities had a dark side. The two traveled together and directed the main force of the rebel slaves. They had convened here. So I don't know if I like that phrasing, rebel slaves, because we have this inference that wherever they're at right now is kind of like a neutral territory, because we said that there are free people and slaves here, and there's a rally. Like, this is where they decided to. So the Juggernauts must have like a majority control here, but not enough to really like to kick out the free people or to take them over. So something's going on there, and we're talking about these rebel slaves. Like, they are not slaves any longer. In their mind and in their body, they are not slaves. So to change the... Like, that would be from the perspective of the Juggernauts, that these are rebel slaves. But from the perspective of the humans, which we are in, it should not, well, of course, they make the inference that maybe the rest of the humans still see themselves as rebel slaves. I don't know. So let's go back. They had convened here on the request of Savad, who had asked them to see his death if he was ever captured. So there's like a backstory here. There's like a whole thing that has happened. We already mentioned that. Like, these two people, he was with them long enough to form a bond with them. They believed it was to add to their resolve, but Savad had confided in Caretaker shortly after asking them this favor. He had taken the healer aside and explained that he wasn't some great savior, but a sinner who was paying for his crimes. He wouldn't say what those sins were, however. He said that they were to watch so they could see the death of an evil man who had done an unspeakable evil act. So here they stood in a crowded square, surrounded by brethren that they would soon free. What's going on here? Watching a man die. The two executioners stepped forward. They seemed to be laughing. If they knew what would become of them in a few short minutes, they would most likely have found an avenue of escape. Why must we watch this, brother? Asked Prophet. Because he asked it of us, responded Caretaker. But we could save him, pleaded Prophet. That is not what he wants, came the simple reply. Boom, and that's the end of it. That's the end of the prologue. Like, what is happening there? So now there's a short conversation about, like, let's draw some parallels, because I feel it in there. There's a lot of scenes that are like this. Think of, like, William Wallace, right? They're in the crowd. They're watching, and they can't do anything about it. Now imagine that you're about to storm the castle, right? You have enough people, like we said. Like, this is not, like, clearly the Juggernauts have enough control here that they're not worried about being attacked. They're doing this to put everybody else on, like, to put them on display, basically. And now we have this inference that there's about to be an insurrection here. Like, they're about to crush this place. And they literally have to wait until Savad is executed in order to begin the process. And the one guy's like, we have everything in place. We could just stop it right now. But he's like, we can't. He doesn't want that. And that's the end of the prologue. So now you're really set up with this beautiful moment that leads into the land of forever. What's going to happen? What's all this stuff? The first chapter is to sin no more. Wow. Just amazing. And there's a lot of stuff wrong there. But if you're interested in, me continuing this project, as you can see, I only have a couple of chapters here. I have some written notes and stuff that I had worked on. We can continue this project if you want. I just figured it'd be something fun to go through and just kind of have a good idea, some fun time here. So let's go back over here. Activate. Wonder powers, activate. There he is. He's back. Okay, now we're in big form here. So that's the prologue of this Land of Forever, right? So I don't know how many books we're going to be in the series. It just kind of writes itself in the sense that, like, the story is of the humans gaining their freedom and kind of going in the idea of the Bible, and they're, going back and forth. It just becomes as long as it's going to be, and trying to fill all that stuff out. And obviously it's been years since I've even tackled the project, so who knows what can come of it if we're going to continue it and whatnot. We could even write, once we get to the end of it, we can start writing again. I'd have to find all my notes though, because back in the day we did computer and paper, so it was just everywhere. So I do know that I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I never actually finished the story for the first book there. But I did definitely have about half of it. I think that's where I was at. Between all my writings and notes and everything, I had about half the story. So, hope you guys enjoyed. We're still rocking the practice, perform, promote, because that's everything. That's everything in life. There's nothing that you can't take away from that. If you want to check out card reviews and Magic Theory, is that right? Yeah, with me, your host. That's this guy. We can talk about Magic if you want to talk about Magic. If you want to talk about writing, we talk about writing right here. This is JC Writing. I don't really have like a bigger name because there's JC Magic, which is card reviews and Magic Theory. There's JC Writing. I don't have like a bigger umbrella name for that. And I even do JC Gaming, which we play mobile games. I don't really have anything set up for doing like computer games, but we play Yu-Gi-Oh over there. So if you like Yu-Gi-Oh, come check it out. I will have the link somewhere. I'll do the stuff. So thank you, everybody. We're doing the same thing. This is still me, right? So remember. Always remember, stay positive, stay active, and stay awesome. And we'll see you in the next one.